My brother ruined my life and took my spouse pregnant. Now he needs my assistance. Later, my parents divorced him and disowned him. Their $200,000 legacy. My more youthful sibling David has had a deep-seated resentment throughout my life toward me. If you believe it was caused by envy, you'd be off base. He was the inclined toward kidnap me. There was no great explanation to make him jealous, and give you some context. Our mother always gave David a break. He was the prodigy of our loved ones. She prepared his dinners, did his clothing, and indeed, even requested that I assist him with his everyday life. Was supposed to help him essentially on the grounds that we were family, yet I never received the same respect as I did. Acknowledge this, as I was very free. Perhaps my part was to blame for always taking care of him without he never asked for anything in return. Helped me when I needed it, and it was the only move toward me when he needed something, while I was a calm, withdrawn kid who delighted in examining and minding my own business. Like our father, he was rough and boisterous. Additionally, I'm usually straightforward and I am open and honest, never hiding things. Consider that my mother might have developed negative impression of me as a result of my straightforwardness. This preference made David the beloved of the family, and I did not mind it while we were growing up anyway. Issues started when he began tormenting and making fun of me because I'm different from him. He would prod me about my level also. The way that I wore glasses. He would slip into my room, read my journal, and then lament my actions to my mother. Had composed when I shouted at him and complained about him to our parents. They would laugh at for invading my privacy off, saying it was anything but nothing to joke about. He did all the more terrible things, like almost breaking my glasses and placing awful things in my food. He even once put pretty much nothing stones in my grain, yet fortunately I found them before they had a chance to hurt my teeth. At the point when I told my mother, she excused it, saying this is the manner by which siblings bond. At the point when we battled, David would focus and we proceeded to insult me on my insecurities. To a similar school, so he realized I was being tormented by a couple of children rather than supporting me. He favored the domineering jerks, calling me names like revolting washout or bushy monkey and empowering them to harm me. Claiming that I was just a large disappointment. Some other time, during a battle over something minor that I can't even recollect, that he advised me to commit suicide, while most insults could easily be ignored by me. That one truly harmed on the grounds that I was battling mental health issues at the time. I'm improving now, however. It was devastating to learn of my brother's death. Wanted to kill me because Dad was frequently. Mom didn't seem to care much about work. Even once, she reprimanded me, claiming that my problem for aggravating him things logically deteriorated during high. There was a shocking incident at school when David tried to put my hair in place fire, and our mother unbelievably guarded him, asserting he was only playing seriously. Who does that? Fortunately, my father ultimately favored me and emphasized the seriousness of the situation, threatening even to call David's arrest. At this point was a real stunner for my sibling, as he had never confronted any ramifications for his activities before he was truly paralyzed, and my father let it be known that enough was enough, and that David expected to begin regarding his more seasoned sibling later. Father came into my space to talk. I never expected his help, since he generally informed David of their similarity, which was valid. Father conceded that he had paused for a long time, hoping David would grow up, but David was slowly becoming apparent to him, turning into a major harasser. Hearing this from my father was unimaginably approving, and I nearly separated in tears. I admitted all that David had done to me over the years and, surprisingly, referenced the tormenting at school. My father was stunned at the amount I had endured. He spoke with the following day principle to make certain that the bullies cautioned about serious outcomes in the event that they Dad carried on into the evening. Enrolled me in MMA training at a nearby gym, letting me know I expected to man up and stand up to menaces in my day-to-day existence. I concede that a nerdy child like I am attempting to learn, even though the fight seemed silly. I was very focused, and I used my time effectively to adjust my investigations and regular exercise routines. Also, the MMA class is totally different. David raised my physical existence one day. His antics continued, and he took my pocket money that we were given for assisting tasks. I had been saving it for some time. David slipped into my room and took it. Just as he was about to cycle, they caught him off with his companions. I requested he return my money. David, but I've said everything I could do was race to Daddy for help. I don't have any idea what came over me. However, I hit him in the face, and he was shocked. Fell in reverse, and I recovered my cash from his pocket prior to tossing him back down. David began to weep heavily, which was very hilarious anyway. My mom surged out to help him and figure out what happened. When she learned I had battled him, she was astounded and reproved me, claiming that I ought to be a better role model for David, who seemed pleased to see me. Reprimanded my mother and made a complaint to me regarding my behavior. My father advised that I be controlled. My father sternly instructed us both to account for ourselves. I let him know how David had taken the cash I had buckled down for and saved, while David attempted to legitimize it by saying he really wanted the cash for a date, and that as his sibling I ought to help him anyway. Father told David he was fortunate I just punched him for stealing for the sake of stealing by others. Called the police. He kept on telling David that he reserved no privilege to take others' things without their assent. That bothered David, so he threw a likely in the hope that our mother would side with him. However, father stayed firm when David realized he wouldn't be. He screamed how he was punished for being hit. Much he detested me and ran back to his room, locking himself inside. As a result occurrence, David started to separate himself from me. He had at last grasped that he was no longer able to harass me, and that even his father had stopped helping him. Jokes without precedent for a long, however, while I felt like we were rises to he was no longer able to physically harm me. Used insults verbally when our guardians weren't around. His way of behaving deteriorated with age, becoming angrier and more impulsive each year. When I moved toward him with an inquiry, he would disregard me and leave way, mumbling affronts like geek or wash out under his breath, assuming he expected to convey something that he would convey to us through mother, as opposed to addressing me directly when I inquired about the reason for. She would, and David couldn't just talk to me, encouraged me to be really grasping. I couldn't determine whether it was simply pubescence or genuinely bitterness. Over time in dealing, his remarks became deplorable, and I longed to leave him and move elsewhere. I repeatedly sought the mediation of my mother, a plunked-down discussion for us to resolve our issues, yet she generally denied, saying she would have rather not gotten involved. When I inquired about her thoughts on why David treated me this way, I eventually ignored the question and left for the university of my dreams, having earned a grant as a top understudy. My father threw me and even my mother a party. Appeared to be glad anyway. David remained detached and far off, scarcely recognizing my accomplishments. The day I left for university was full of anticipation for the foreseeable future and relief from the poisonous home climate. The initial not many I felt free during my time at university. Made new companions, partook in my classes, and begun to construct a daily existence separate from my oppressive environment. Youth. The steady feeling of dread toward David's boisterous ambushes lifted, giving me a newly discovered feeling of harmony. During my second year, I met my better half, Karen, at a fraternity party through a companion, and we right away clicked from a religious source. Foundation. Having children beyond, however, marriage was frowned upon. When we found she was pregnant in our last year, we chose to wed right. Our wedding after graduation was small, yet happy function. Our folks were glad for ourselves, and we partook in the celebration. At the time, I thought I had Karen, the love of my life. Continuously imagined a monogamous relationship, one lady to get back home to, also share my existence with, regardless of other women who have shown interest over time. I sought after nothing since I was really happy in my marriage. Karen was my beauty queen, and I won't ever need to harm her. But I later discovered two occurrences of treachery in our marriage. One was an irregular undertaking with her hitched associate that crossed a few years, while the other was only a brief affair with an ex during a visit to her family. Some could think I was gullible, and looking back, I am unable to fully differ. Each time we isolated for a, despite my decision to forgive my wife, wanted to avoid raising our child and escaped our home, and believed we overcome these challenges. The relationship with her collaborator happened when we were youthful. Furthermore, I ascribed it to young missteps. What's more, misguided thinking. For a period, things appeared to improve despite the fact that I would be able at no point ever completely trust her in the future. I did my best to put my doubts aside, because I know that assuming I decided to excuse, I needed to really make progress toward a new beginning. It's been 4 years have passed since her second betrayal, and felt positive about my choice to give her additional opportunity. Karen seemed to have changed, and we were truly pleased, planning the future of our family. But my world was shattered once a few months ago. More so when she admitted to having been having a relationship for a long time and offering that our child probably won't be mine. Her words struck me with a crushing weight, a blend of overwhelming shock, betrayal, and disbelief. I attempted to appreciate the tremendousness of her admission. In a daze, I figured out how to inquire as to why she had kept such a crucial secret, and how she might have done something to her that is so devastating. The reaction was icy and apathetic, as if she was removed from the suffering due to her hazy responses, which left me with a greater number of inquiries than responds to a. It was strange and excruciating. Second, going up against the broke trust and vulnerability about my own family, I kept on squeezing Karen for reality, since I believed I had the right to know the dad of the kid I had been raising since birth. Eventually she let it be known was David. As I asked Karen, their eyes widened in shock. What she implied, she made sense of that. Furthermore, David had become companions when I acquainted her with my family, and she remained with us from Thanksgiving until New Year's. David, normally cold to me, was warm and pleasant towards her, which made me happy in light of the fact that I didn't need Karen to not feel welcome. Karen intended to acknowledge into my family, so she spent a lot of time with my mother whenever it's possible. That she noticed the gap between together with me, David inquired about it. I got serious about our stressed relationship and made sense of that we may never fix it because of his unsettled. Karen felt them, but she started including David in our travels in the hope would be of assistance to bond. Whenever we planned to watch a film, she welcomed David and we viewed whatever he wanted to watch. During this time, David and I traded a couple of words which represented an improvement over his usual silence, as I recall Karen also David hanging out and playing video games together. However, I never thought a lot of it. Karen let me know that one day David opened dependent upon her about his battles, and after a recent breakup, he felt vulnerable. Met her and became friends with her. She referenced that he would innocuously be a tease with her when I wasn't anywhere near, and things eventually got worse beyond her control. The vision of my significant other, and I felt bad about my brother sleeping together. Debilitated. Karen admitted that she felt liable a while later and left him, which matched her sudden decision to return home. Rather than enjoying New Year's with me despite my efforts to persuade her to remain, she was resolute about leaving. When we met back at school after special times of year, she was her typical happy self, so I addressed nothing. 14 days after the fact, we learned that she was expecting. Karen conceded she couldn't say whether the youngster was David's or mine, and there was no way to prove that. She decided to remain with me. It was the more trustworthy to know I sibling. For this reason we got hitched. My reality felt like it was crashing down. The child I adored probably won't be mine. I inquired whether Karen had been sleeping recently with David, and she gradually, with a nod, she disclosed that they had always kept in contact in light of the fact that their science was unquestionable, that they would escape to hotels, lying to me about how they work. Additional time. She conceded that portion of her work excursions were really heartfelt trips with him, and I inquired as to why. Hitched me, assuming that she needed my sibling, and Karen said she would have rather not been the one to sever the marriage. She saw me as a brilliant dad to our child, and deciding to remain silent, I made a mistake and wasn't sure when to stop. Told Karen I was happy she told me the truth, yet that I planned to get together. Furthermore, leave. She began crying, requesting pardoning, and anticipated that I should shout at her. Rather, I serenely stuffed my garments. If I loved Karen, she insisted, ought to battle for herself, and that errors occur in each marriage. When she acknowledged I will do nothing, she altered her strategy, asserting that our son be impacted by a separation and that youngsters ought not be brought up in broken homes. I informed her that I may not even be the father who caused her to weep more and say that I am cruel. It appeared as though she believed nothing make me want to divorce the couple. Perhaps my part was to blame for allowing things to go unnoticed in the past. While I cherished her, it seemed more like it originated from thinking we had a child together, and have been since school. Karen continued to demand it wasn't too late to fix things, but I had trouble to put their faith in her and lost all patience. Trust was a significant issue, and her words felt empty. Regardless of whether I excused her, I could never forget her sexual liaison with my sibling. I've generally had confidence in excusing botches, since we as a whole are, despite its flaws. This was beyond reproach limits. I left her crying on the doorstep. What's more, looked into it, and the following day I immediately went to my parents and disclosed everything about the affair my wife had with David, making sense of how they had been furtively dozing together for a really long time. The shock on their appearances was unquestionable. Valid to her temperament, my mom at first attempted to shield David, demanding that her kid would never do something like this to his own. Still up in the air to uncover reality, I requested that my folks stay quiet and allow me to call David before them. I trained them to keep silent so I could surprise David and make him believe David had a private conversation at the time. Called back and I confronted him about the undertaking. At first he fervently refused to accept any of it, denied it obligation anyway. When I told him that Karen had owned up to all that, he began to blame her, calling her he claimed it wasn't his characterless issue on the off chance that ladies were drawn to him, and that he had a better face than his brother. I firmly assured him that I would expose him to everybody. When David ridiculed me, saying nobody would accept me since he was the prodigy, I laughed at his arrogance and acknowledged his confirmation, knowing the truth. Our parents had heard all that. David went calm and afterwards spluttered in an effort to justify himself and restore his image. My mother is still. David was asked to explain his shock. He stumbled through a meager effort to justify his actions by laying blame on everyone else yet himself, and frantically trying to move the fault onto Karen. I could see my mom, who had once been defensive of her incline toward child, presently felt a combination of anger and disappointment. In that charged second I felt a peculiar feeling of justification. For quite a long time I had persevered David's agony after learning the truth. David was in charge, and the roles were reversed. Who stood uncovered, his activities revealed so that everybody might be able to see. As David's words wavered, my dad, typically saved in his looks, couldn't contain his dissatisfied. He requested that I pass him the telephone and started to address David. David, my dad started, his voice loaded with frustration. What you've done isn't simply a double crossing of your sibling, but you slept on a family betrayal with your sibling's better half and proceeded the undertaking even after they were hitched. Your actions have serious repercussions. Furthermore, have irreversibly broken the I raised you both with the trust we had in you to uphold morality and family ties. Your display today defies all expectations. I've attempted to show you. He stopped, letting the heaviness of his words sink into David's heart. Your dismissal for the emotions of your brother and the absence of regard for his marriage are unsatisfactory. You've not just harmed him, yet in addition destroyed the bonds that hold together as a family. Your mother and I are incompletely to fault for what you've become, but we won't allow it anymore. This way of behaving, from today you're cut off from the school finances I set up for you. You'll need to sort out some way to pay your own tuition costs at the university. I'll additionally quit subsidizing your way of life. Do you think being a man makes you more? See how it goes by sleeping with married women. You oversee without my cash. All through this I kept a made disposition, despite my initial desire to scream at David. Watching my father rebuff him was the ultimate reward. I had revealed his real essence, and it was clear he had underrated the outcomes. In spite of David's his protests persisted as justification. But my father quickly finished the call, closing down David's endeavors to rationalize his activities. A short time later, my mother drew nearer me and embraced me. It had been quite a while since we shared a similar experience. But in that hug there was an implicit understanding and backing. In the midst of this, she offered an apology for not accepting me this time. My 14-year-old self would never have envisioned this second being justified, and my mother embraced me. After this, my dad helped me find a good lawyer to separate from Karen. She and her legal counselor attempted to lie about asking for alimony because I procured more than her, yet her undertaking played vigorously in support of myself. We too led a paternity test, and it was confirmed David's identity as father of the kid. The news was extraordinarily difficult, far more atrocious than finding Karen's disloyalty. I was furious that my beloved son and raised wasn't mine anyway. I chose to persevere. Karen pleaded with me to continue, arguing that my son shouldn't be visiting. Rebuffed for the circumstance, however, I recalled him to me, couldn't bear to see him a lot of David, and I despised it. Later my separation was concluded. I felt a sense of opportunity wash over me as I moved into my own single-man cushion. It felt dreamlike to live alone, since I had hitched so youthful and never had the opportunity to possess independence. But my normally autonomous nature permitted me to rapidly adjust to my new way of life, and 2 weeks ago, I thoroughly enjoyed it. My dad called to let me know he was thinking about changing his will since he didn't need giving anything to David. My father is extraordinarily difficult, and when he chose to eliminate David from his life, he adhered to it. David gave, arriving at a shot to our guardians, and even appeared at their doorstep asking for absolution, yet they would not give him access. Even my mother, who for the most part gave in David's fits, appeared to be finished with him. However, it probably been hardest for her. David never messaged me to apologize for what he had done, showing he didn't lament his activities. He was simply unglued about being cut off from our parents, my father informed me. Wanted to pass on everything to me, making sure David wouldn't challenge it later. He would only leave David $1. My gaze widened in surprise as my father worked the entirety of his life, including his assets, fund for retirement, and life insurance. The total was almost $2 million. The main condition in his will was that assuming my father died before my mother, she would keep living in their house despite the fact that possession would move to me. I wouldn't fret this as I wanted to take care of my mom when she died. David somehow learned about this. Furthermore, unfit to arrive at our folks' call, I attempted to make amends yesterday. He made sense of how he was battling with college, which Karen later discovered the paternity of the kid. She had been bothering him for youngster support. He said he had no cash and was searching for seasonal positions yet couldn't find anything. He implored me to converse with our family to begin from scratch because he truly needed my assistance. I laughed at him and let him know I was finished with him. I reminded him that he ought to have considered the outcomes prior to laying down with David's wife and getting pregnant. Contended that I was being out of line and that Karen was likewise to fault, to which I concurred. I advised him that I had separated from her, making her his obligation. Now he shouldn't be calling me to gripe about her or the kids since these were the outcomes of his own decisions. David began to raise his voice, but I stopped him, pointing out to him that he was no longer lean toward youngster in the family, however the black sheep who had laid down with his own siblings' better half. At that point David began to weep, describing how everyone, counting our grandparents and family members, had betrayed him. While this was true, I explained, it was no longer my concern. Him that he ought to, and that we were done. At absolutely no point ever call me in the future, since I no more thought of him as my brother. I've since reenacted the conversation going on in my head. Despite I had never heard of hatred for my brother. Him cried basically not since we were kids. I won't lie, it hurt me a piece to see him so vulnerable, so I suppose I'm here to inquire as to whether I ought to converse with our folks about him, or on the other hand, assuming that I would be, and if I don't refresh one. Hello there everybody, a large number of you have been inquiring as to why I'm no more in touch with my child Henry, and some have even called me awful. I want to explain that I'm not at ease bringing up another man's youngster. This isn't I was led to believe that the stepson situation, Henry, was my child, just to later find he is really my sibling David's child. Normally this disclosure hurt profoundly. What's more, I cried over it for quite a long time. The fundamental reason I need no contact with Henry is that I never again need Karen in my life. In the event that I stay associated with her kid, she will find a way to reappear. You might think that life demands my privacy. I'm mean or egotistical, but I can't see him. At least not for a very long time. Time for an update. Most of you guessed that my mother was the one who informed David of my father's alteration to his will, eventually prompt David to call me. Rely on resolving issues I confronted her with in front of my father, and she separated, saying I had rebuffed David enough and that he had taken in his illustration my father. That's what immovably let my mom know. Whether she accepted what David did was trivial then. At that point, he could never again remain wedded to her because he would never be able to overlook such a lie. This threat stifled my mother. My father clarified that in the event that she ever spoke with David once more, and we discovered she could pack her belongings and leave. As I referenced, my father is very stubborn. I hope my mother will understand her. From Botch's Update 3 Reddit. It's been 5 months since my last update. My relationship with my folks has further developed throughout recent months. My father, furthermore, I go hitting the fairway consistently, and he treats me more like a mate than a child. Even though she misses David, my mother has, the last I heard, stayed away from him. About David was from my cousin, who said David had been begging for money from everyone. What's more, in the end needed to exit school since he was unable to bear the expenses he and Karen are living respectively. Additionally, he works as a mechanic part-time. It seems like they're raising Henry together, which is something worth being thankful for. I surmise I never speak about David to my parents, and they don't bring him up either, for everybody asking. I'm doing very well. I was advanced at my specific employment 2 months prior, so my compensation has fundamentally further developed. I haven't been dating anybody, as I believe I still need reality to mend. I've been in therapy, so we'll see how it goes. That works out.